The Snapshots Music and Arts Foundation presents a conversation with Juilliard professor and noted author David Dubal on the history of the piano and state of classical music. Part 3.
Let's talk about your teachers. Who were they and how did they affect your life?
Well, I think that every piano teacher, Jonathan, affects the life of the student very much, for positive or negative or both. My parents didn't, necessarily see any great talent in me or anything else. They got me a piano at age 9 because maybe they wanted to keep up with their friends or something. Who knows? In America, keeping up with the Joneses is a tremendous pastime. So I went to this woman, Miss Fisher, now deceased, but I liked her very much. I was 9 years old. I didn't know what to say, what to do, but, I think she had a calming influence on someone that was rather, and always has remained, not too educable and in the traditional ways. So she was someone that I didn't know if she was good or not, but I liked her. So liking someone is always an important thing. She taught me, I think, as well as she could have. I didn't know what that meant. I became, in the 4 years I studied with her, her best student. And whenever her little programs, I would be the little star or whatever. So practicing became very much a part of my life. Kids were not terribly undisciplined then. If the mother said, well, you didn't practice yesterday, you would try to make up for it, and I think this was not unusual because from my time there, and many people they were taught to, work a little.
Yes.
It's not like today where, it's an entitlement generation, and they sit in front of computers all day and cell phones. And this has made them totally invisible to culture. Around 4 years later, a lucky thing happened to me. And this is the way it almost always is if parents don't know. Remember, my parents didn't know that at 9 years old, my options were quickly, being determined that, I could not have the reflexes later on or the kinds of training that you need when you're young. Many people should start around 6.
Right.
5 when you really show a great deal of talent, but 6, 7, 8. But this is, of course, no rule. So my brother started at 7 and he went nowhere. But it's not a bad idea if you have some kind of determination or talent to start around 7, 7.5. That would be a pretty good age in my opinion. 9, 9.5 is already getting a little bit too old. But once again, many virtuosi like Raymond Lewenthal, he didn't start studying until he was 16, and many other examples of people that, have tremendous reflexes and split-second this and that and many other attributes, will begin in their teens and do well. The fact that there's just too many people spouting off rules about piano teaching, it's not a science, it's a psychological concept, and teachers are not very good psychologists in general. They may know a few things about music or fingerings or whatever their teacher told them, but they're not necessarily, they don't know how to encourage and to bring out the best. So this woman didn't know enough, really, to bring out the best, and she didn't know, she'd think, well, isn't this effective? We'll give her an arrangement of the Grieg concerto. So at age 13, I was outside playing baseball, and my mother called me in with a long scream, that I heard in the baseball field. I came in, it sounded like she wanted to see me, and I came in, and there was this fellow by the name of James Stream, who had been at Juilliard and was a good friend or his parents were a good friend of my mother's and father's, and I had never seen him before, but he came in trying to sell tickets, of which he did, and to a recital he was going to give in Cleveland. So that was my first great musical experience, and he was he was playing for us, and I was like overwhelmed. I had, been introduced to piano from the radio. And I would sneak down, age 9, 8, 10, 11, and listen to the FM station, because there was a man on there called Henry Pildner, and he played Chopin waltz, and then he would play classical music through the night, and I'd, try to stay up as much as possible. So you see, there it is. There's no environment for it, no genetic necessity for it, nothing. I just heard that music, and that music just made me crazy. I loved it so much. Mm. So everyone is different, and if the parents can figure it out a little and spend a little time, maybe we would have a lot more success. Mostly, the people that play the piano leave it, which is because of the teachers, and no other reason. It's not because of non-talent, because everyone likes music. They don't know how to teach it and make it, accessible to them at the stage they're in. Right. So this guy said, play for me. And I was, 13 or something, 12 and a half, 13. And I played for him, and he says, well, he's a real talent, but, doesn't he play any Bach? I said, I never, had any Bach. I didn't know anything about anything, technique, scales, this and that. So he said, I'm going to go back to Juilliard. I did go to the recital, and I was astonished. And I had, even on our piano at home, some, one of those, the middle-class pianos, they called, they were not uprights, but consoles, they called them. And he played the Winter Wind Etude, things that I had not known, and I was just spellbound. Went to the concert, he played, I remember to this day, every note. And he said, I'll come back from school again next summer. He must have been 23 at that time, 24. Seemed very mature to me into what he was doing. And I studied with him, and he was a damn good teacher. And I studied with him in the summer to go to a woman called Frances Bolton Courtoyer. And Courtoyer, it was, one of the first families of Cleveland. Her name was Bolton, but she had married a man by the name of Courtoyer, who was, almost 40 years older than her when she married, and he was a pupil of Liszt in Rome. And so, my God, that was, I had already been reading a great deal about music, because I think, when you're really interested in the subject, even a kid, they just find the right books. And so I was doing that, and I knew much more than most people about Franz Liszt or Chopin or whatever. And I went to her. She accepted me, and I had found out that Madame Courtoyer had been, was one of the great teachers in Ohio, and they came from all over Ohio every week to study with her. And I didn't know if I would be accepted, but I was. And she was an amazingly austere and very old when I got to her, like 81 years old. And at that day, that 81 was really long and old, and she was about 6 foot high, without doubt, very, very thin, lived alone in almost like a mansion with her 2 concert grands, picture of Beethoven on the wall, right out of the movies. But she was a real teacher, my God, everything, and a German pedant to boot, in the sense of, how she did it. The notebook was filled. Every thing was told to you. This is how you practice this. You get the scale up to metronome 86, 84, and you work in thirds, sixths, tenths, and so forth. So she built the only technique that I could have ever said happened. So by 13, 14 years old, I was starting to build the technique. So that is a very, very big influence. She knew what she was doing, and she did it well. So I didn't know what I was going to do, and everyone would be going to Ohio State, which was very cheap then, and so no one's encouraging me in any way. I was given a scholarship to the Cleveland Institute of Art, but I turned it down. I went to Ohio State, and the art teacher there said, stay with me. He had seen that I had unusual talent in his mind, and in the music school, I went at the same time, and I found a man that, was the most inspiring person of my life, a pianist who had studied at Juilliard and was now the top teacher at Ohio State. And he said to me, you're a little better than the other people here in my studio, and I'm going to, take care of you, so to speak. And he became my mentor. He took me to concerts, and his wife and him, looked out for me, and I met his family. And he was from Curacao, the Netherlands Antilles, from a, long colonial family, that went back to 1700. One of those ruling families of the Netherlands Antilles, so to speak. And he worked with me very hard for a year, but he told me that he wanted me to go to Juilliard, that this school, 3 more years wouldn't do me any good. He wasn't sure I was prepared for it, but, I worked in, and I took the audition, and I got in. So I was always a little behind, and I needed to practice as well, because I was not, the major virtuoso of Juilliard in the post-Clyburn Browning years, that kind of thing. Madame Levine had all of the best students. I had gone to Alani Epstein, who was a fine musician, and she was, old and boring to me, and especially after Wim Muller, who also composed his Antillian dances and was just a colorful and fantastic person. So at Juilliard, I did fine. There was nothing wrong with it, but I didn't have any inspiration from the teachers at all. When I got out, then I came back to Cleveland to teach, and I said, well, I'm going to try to study with a man that I truly admire. I graduated, and what am I going to do? The same thing as everyone today. What am I going to do? I went home and started a piano class, and, had, in no time, 40, 45 students. Taught every day from like 3 o'clock, all the little kids in Cleveland Heights and all the other suburbs, Shaker and on, and felt very good, at a young age, making some money and on and on. I didn't know what would be in the future or anything. I studied with Arthur Lesser, the writer of Men, Women, and Pianos, the greatest sociological history on the piano or in anything. He was quite wonderful to me, and posthumously I've been quite wonderful to him. I, have constantly pushed the book and kept it in print and a lot of other things, and his playing has always been on my show, for he was one of the great, great pianists, not one of the great known pianists, but in his circle, and in Cleveland he was a god. He was also very unusual in the sense that he was head of the faculty at Cleveland Institute. He was also the writer of that book, and he was also an expert on Asian art, and he was also the Cleveland Press, his main music critic for many, many years. In some ways, he was a role model because, I have told everyone, and including myself, that you've got to do a lot of things in music to survive. You're not going to be, one of the 6 people that make a big living from the piano. So I said, diversify, man, diversify. And I say that to the kids. Do whatever you can, but try to stay in music. Now, I do not even say that any longer, stay in music. I realize that, it's not going to be so easy to produce a person that does a lot of things either. So I may be one of the last of the dinosaurs or whatever, because, it's truly, Jonathan, hard to make any kind of career now. Unless you have, great money behind you, tremendous connections, and that you're very good, of course, and but not too good, because no one can be too good now. In other words, they can be tremendously great command of the instrument, but the lack of imagination is sometimes appalling, and just appalling. And that is almost the case with almost all of the dozen people worldwide that make a living from the piano. The command is, you'd think they're, with that kind of command, that they would be able to just woo you in every way. But they don't, because they don't have that romantic temperament, which is the essence of what the piano's literature and what it's all about. So anyway, I did my best after school, and I came back, and I maybe there were 2,500 applicants in this to teach in the blind school. Anywhere, people were just killing themselves at that time to get a job. And the woman who's now 102 years old or 4, she hired me. She liked my hair. But she was a woman with tremendous flair. She never needed to play in public and knew all the Beethoven sonatas in the Well-Tempered Clavier. Her name is Elizabeth Tode, and Thode. And let me tell you something, what a woman. And so I went out there to the Bronx every single day and taught the blind kids for a year, and it was incredible. And I would come home, I would still practice. I still had those little, tinges as a young man in my 20s that I would be able to, play in public in a reasonable, amount of things or whatever. Never thinking I would go into a competition or anything like that. I could never have faced that. So, but that was early days, where the competition still reigned, like Liburn and had started, and they were just, not like today when, the winner, that you don't know their names the next week. But that would have never happened to me. I could never have, held up in a competition. The sensitive don't do well. And then one day I had heard of a possibility of a job in radio, and I said, oh my God, do I want this? It was literally the programming of a whole station, not of the prestige of WQXR, but of a small cult station that I had built up now in the next years into, a really major force and the real prototype of all programming, all modern programming. So I had that job, and, now I felt, well, I don't want to teach in a college. I had also, and the blind school was really an institute of tremendous learning, only gifted blind, and there was a music conservatory, and it was all taken very, very seriously. It was as if you were teaching in a university campus and all. That was it. I had to take this job. If I had stayed there, I would have been stuck, just as if I had stayed in Cleveland, I would have been stuck, teaching little kids the rest of my life. The influences of my teacher have always been there. None of them were great enough teachers, even lesser, to not care, but their energy is so dispersed through teaching. They just don't have it in them to give enough to each student. And that is the same in all places. They're tired of it. They themselves are frustrated players. In that way, I really consider myself self-taught, and I tell all of the kids, because they look to a teacher in a tragic way almost, that teacher is going to give them the fountain of, pianism or youth or whatever, or winning competition. And I say, get out of school as fast as you can, be on your own, you will feel great as an adult, and don't go play for everyone. They will all tell you something that will confuse you. If you're an artist in your heart and soul, you will start developing in your own way through yourself. And I said, after 24, I never played again for anyone. I don't care if I needed it, not needed it. This was a rule that everything had to stem from me. This is the way I want to play it, with whatever my technique is, whatever my da-da-da, and I would love the process of doing that, but it would be horrifying to say, okay, now would you listen to me? What do I care what they say? And I try to instill this idea that they will have much more fun and think of themselves as an artist, which is the important thing, as a pianist, not as some student all their lives looking for the golden teacher.
You went out and interviewed some of the great pianists of the past century, and it seems you've been doing that for some time.
Yes, absolutely. And that started as soon as I could in radio, and so I had felt already that the piano is my life. I adore it. I want to be its spokesman in its way. So I definitely had understood I'm not going to be the next Horowitz, and it wasn't in me to be that kind of man or that kind of person, nor did I have that kind of ability, but I had others. I had, I had the sheer love for the piano, and I've told the kids, you have to diversify. Figure out how you're going to go. And I think I always figured out how I was going to go. The first moment I had a chance to be on the radio, I did that. The first chance I had to do a lecture, I did that. The first time I had a chance to do a lecture recital, I did that. So everything I could do, without any ego, without any, is this great? Is this, am I terrific? Just, Arthur Lesser said something very important. He said, if you're not a servant to music, you're nothing. I don't care what your status is. I think that, to be a servant to this great art has been spiritually a blessing for me.
Absolutely, and it seems like the musicians you interviewed must have gotten the sense that you cared about the history, about what they had done, and you've built up such a catalog of work.
I think so. I think they, certainly understood that I understood each of their own playing. But when you're talking to a row, you're talking about, an ingrown and introverted great Faustian figure. When you're talking to Horowitz, you're talking to like a very different type. When it was a Pogarelish who still had enough mental health not to be too arrogant, you had to treat him in a certain way and work around the fanaticism of what he had been told, so to speak, about life. He was just too young to have known anything, but he played wonderfully. He had won the big competition or came in second. And actually, the post-competition beginning is when he lost the Chopin, and they all said, "Oh, he's the one," but some Vietnamese actually won, and you never heard of him again. But Pogarelish was a master of publicity. Now he's just, he's just a little bit mad or something, not doing well, and nor should he be playing in public. It's amazing that so many, when it came to talking about the piano and the ones that were highly successful, each one of them showed that almost demonic desire to play repertoire that was different, let's say. They each had a characteristic. I mean, Grant Johannesson, he wanted to play things that no one else had played, not because, they were neglected, but he loved French music or this or that. Kovacevic, he would practice savagely, as he said, to make sure that nothing could happen, that, he's going to play the late Beethoven sonatas the way he should. The dedication of all of these people, was stupendous. And there, nothing was put on. I mean, once they're talking about music, their real person comes out, and the real person is usually very fabulous if they have succeeded. They succeeded because they not only had talent, but they had the desire to continue practicing and the desire to be on stage. You've got to have that desire to be on stage. It has to be fierce, but it can't just be an ego thing. These are not actors. These are not, exhibitionists. They are actors in the sense that they have to act many, many parts, and it's very serious to play Bach. And then you have to play another composer like a different way. Prokofiev is not Bach, and this is not Prokofiev. And, it's a great strain if you're serious. Okay, someone will say to you, your Bach is not like Gould. But, of course, you have to also make sure that it's not like anyone else's. It has to be Bach. It's a rough world. So we can't just have, these internets and these computers and no art in the schools, no literature, no refinements. And now if you have some biological mutation who's a young kid who goes into the school, he'll be hit on the head if he says, I love Shakespeare or anything like that. They hate Beethoven. They hate classical music. And there's many, many aspects of this. This is highly politicized stuff. In England, you have Mozart concertos being piped in at the bus stops to make sure that there's no loitering there or, no criminality. I just read a huge thing, the weaponization of Mozart. So it is all political, and art is an elitist term. And in a country where there are two major words you don't use, which is racism and elitism, I think that the whole thing is very much an economic thing. You walk into Barnes and Nobles, and they have these reprints of the great classics under, but the rest of it is cookbooks, how to improve your abs, how to improve your relationships. There's no books at all. Thousands and thousands of books, but no books. If I ask, did you have the essential canon? Oh, we'll order it, sir.
It struck me when you were talking that we still don't have anything equivalent to a minister of culture, and our National Endowment for the Arts is extremely underfunded, and yet we find no problem funding these other ventures. So that's a values issue at its core.
Yeah, there's no values for the arts here, and any nation that we don't have a national theater. This is 2000. They've been talking about one through the whole 20th century. Nothing. no national ballet company, no national theater. Our art museums are grotesque outside of the, you know, finely curated ones of the big cities. If you're not going to have a public, and of course, as we know, it's a third world country as well, so I mean, you're not going to have my cab driver in New York buy my book or come to my lectures. I mean, and so, you know, we're not talking about 25, 30 years ago when there was still a few people.
There has to be a shift in the education of the listeners and individuals who want to absorb the culture, the cream at the top, to understand that for this to happen, there has to be support.
If you read the book called The Revolt of the Masses, it's all been talked about by Gasset Ortega, Jose Ortega de Gasset, in 1930. It's a book that everyone should read. The Revolt of the Masses and Why We Are the Way We Are Now.
Thank you for listening.